Hey there, this is Phil. Welcome back to the show. I am here with Sky Jitani.
Hello, Phil.
Hi, Sky. How are you?
I'm well.
Good. Is that a Nehru collar?
Yes, it is.
Oh, that's fantastic. Did you get it in India?
I did. I've had it for a couple of years. I've worn it many times on this program.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And Christian Taylor.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Christian. How are you?
Good. You're kind of checkered today.
I bought a couple of flannel shirts.
And they're gray.
Of course.
Imagine that.
They're both gray.
Gray and black. You wove it both in there.
One's kind of white and black, and the other one's gray and black.
Yeah, you're looking snazzy.
It's more colors. I have white, black, and gray.
3 now.
That's 3 colors.
You're really stretching yourself.
And you're pinky, salmony. For those of you listening, Christian.
And 60s.
Yeah, that's a nice 60s print.
You know,
I know.
remember, 80% of our audience does not watch this on YouTube, so
But
they have
They
no
really
idea.
should.
Do you ever listen to football on the radio though? Because
No.
some of the commentators will go out of their way to say
To describe
this
everything.
team is they're in their away costumes,
Because
which
they
are
need to fill time.
Costumes. How about
costumes,
uniforms?
which are blue and
Everything's a
gold
show to
Do you know-
fill.
with the red
On
letters,
baseball-
so you can picture it in your head.
Baseball, they start from their cleats and go all the way up and describe
On the
what
radio?
they're wearing. Yeah.
They do?
Yep.
Because it's a slow
Beginning of every
game, and they
game.
got a lot of space to fill on the radio.
He's
It's true, kind of like this
wearing
podcast.
He's wearing cleats.
I want to move along because I got to pick up my daughter.
Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. Oh, we'll talk to Sky.
Hi.
And Christian, too.
Hi, Phil.
And we've got a guest here just for you.
Woohoo!
We'll meet her in a second. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. Okay.
Nicely done.
All right, let's hit it because Sky's in a hurry. And we have a special guest all the way from Minnesota who does not, her Minnesota accent is terrible. It's not even close to being accurate, but we'll get to that in a bit. News this week. Catholics love their work more than evangelicals. Study finds.
Do they whistle while they work?
I don't think so. That's not a Catholic thing to whistle.
I think it's a dwarf thing.
Yeah, it's a dwarf thing. In a recent study by Baylor University, evidence shows that Catholics win out over Christian evangelicals in terms of who is the most emotionally committed to their place of employment.
You know what's ironic about that?
What?
It was the Protestants who came up with the work ethic.
Yeah,
the famous Protestant
They
work
actually mention that.
Oh,
They
well,
actually
excuse
mention
me.
that in here.
Keep going.
The one mitigating factor, according to the study, is how big the company is. The smaller the company, data suggests, the more committed the Catholic is.
But that's also ironic.
Why?
Because the Catholic Church
It's
is
huge.
is huge. It's the biggest church there is.
It's huge.
Well, they need a place to belong.
So, okay, so why would evangelical Christians be less committed to their workplace than Catholics? I have a theory.
I do too.
What a shock.
The Baylor study did not actually get into the whys at all.
I could give you 2 theories, but I want to hear yours first.
Okay. My theory
I have
is...
no theories in case anyone cares.
My theory is because we... And this is nothing that Sky has ever thought of before or written about.
Okay.
Ever.
This is an original thought.
Because we de-emphasize the value of work over evangelism, missions, the pastorate.
It's not holy.
So when we go out and get a job just at a company, doing company business, we don't feel like it's as important.
Yeah, it's called dualism.
Oh, you give it a
called-
fancy word.
I didn't give it that
Dualism.
word. But again, that's ironic because it was the dualism of the medieval Roman Catholic Church that led to the Protestant Reformation, which then led to this idea that all areas of life were sacred and all vocations were sacred and all work mattered. That was a huge pillar of the Protestant Reformation in response to the dualism of Catholicism. And then you look at the church today, and I'd argue that the Roman Catholic Church is probably more holistic in its approach to life than most evangelicalism, which is very dualistic.
Well, what the heck happened?
That's part. Well, I agree with you, Phil. That is one explanation.
Well,
I think
you've
there's
got
a
another
second.
one.
I think
What's the other one?
I think
What's
that
the other one?
the evangelical tradition tends to celebrate entrepreneurialism a lot. both in
Yeah.
ministry, in missions, and in life in general. So I think there's probably more of an entrepreneurial spirit among evangelicals.
Okay.
And therefore, working for a large corporation or a big business just feels like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing something more independent and exciting.
Okay. That's interesting.
Is that the only theory you had, or did you have another one?
No, I only had one theory.
The dualism
I'm a
one.
one theory man. Keep
Okay.
keep it simple.
He's very
Okay.
monogamous.
I believe it.
But this is interesting. The other finding that surfaced in the study is that people who have no religious affiliation and are not likely to have an attachment to God at all are at the back of the bus in terms of their feelings of commitment towards their workplaces. Their scores were considerably lower on the scale of workplace attachment than that of Catholics or evangelicals.
And what's the explanation for that?
They don't have one.
But you do.
We have to come up with one.
We do.
Because they're hopeless and they've given up on life.
So you think that this probably applies to all areas of their life, not just work?
Oh, yeah. They can't even get out of bed in the morning.
Nothing like whitewashing a whole fence. So
No,
why
I
do
don't
you,
know.
why do
I
you
think
find
that's
this study
interesting.
so interesting?
Because it inverts what you would expect.
Because it's something to talk about. But the man who did the research at Baylor emphasized, he wanted to stress that you should not use his findings to disproportionately hire Catholics rather than evangelicals.
Now that's
Or
where-
avoid
Or
atheists.
either, but he didn't say that. He didn't say
Oh.
don't avoid atheists. So maybe, if you want a committed employee, I wonder if it's because
Isn't it because there's more Catholics than Protestants to begin with?
No,
No.
it's
Wouldn't that
not about
skew the
number.
numbers?
no, it's about emotional commitment.
Okay.
It has nothing to do. There could be one Catholic, and they could still be more emotionally committed than 4 million Southern Baptists. What was I talking about? Oh, the atheist.
Yeah.
Where if you're on the less religious end of the spectrum, maybe you're just less likely to be. Maybe you're more isolated. Socially isolated, civically isolated.
Okay.
Because we're losing our civic attachments.
I think there's not an apple and orange. I
I
think
thought you
there-
were going to say there's an
I think,
app
no,
for
I think,
that.
I think there's a chicken and egg situation going on here.
Yeah. Is the atheist the chicken or the egg?
It could be both.
Go, Sky.
I don't
go.
think the atheist believes in the chicken.
That's rich.
So here's a theory.
Okay.
People who tend to be atheist in their view of the universe may have a predisposition toward distancing themselves from large group attachment,
Yes.
right? They don't want to
Institutional mistrust.
Exactly. So that might just be their basic disposition as a personality, which
Yeah.
makes atheism attractive because they don't want to be a part of some big organized religion. It may also explain why they're not super happy in workplace environments because they don't feel a deep sense of commitment and loyalty in general.
Right. And especially if you're in the minority, if
Right.
most of the people, your coworkers, are religious, maybe you don't really connect with them that well.
Yeah, and the inverse may also be true because if you have a deep need to be part of some large community institution,
Yeah.
then what better than the Catholic Church?
Yeah. So if you own a small business,
Hire Catholics.
first of all, go for the Catholics.
We do not hire
Secondly-
based on race, religion, or otherwise.
Secondly, grab a Baptist if there's one handy.
And if you don't want them to drink, get two.
Oh yeah, two.
Yeah.
Because then they can go out and
They'll
they
hold
still
each other accountable.
No,
They
because
still
then they
won't
won't
drink.
drink.
Because they'll
They
the
still-
judging.
Yeah, you have never heard that joke about
Yeah.
Baptists?
Yeah. What's the whole joke?
Well,
Let me hear
It's something like if you're going camping with a bunch of guys and you bring beer, don't invite a Baptist because he'll drink all of it. You have to invite two because then they won't drink any of it.
That's a good one.
Something like that.
What are you saying? What are you saying about Baptists?
Accountability is a good thing.
Okay. What?
I have a question.
What?
I know you didn't plan this, and you can choose
Uh-oh.
not to answer it because it is
Here we
your
go.
show.
Hang on, everybody.
So I have been noticing that Russell Moore is getting a lot of heat. And I wondered,
Speaking of Baptists,
speaking of
Yeah,
Baptists,
that's one of our favorite Baptists.
so he's taking a lot of heat because, as I understand it, he's saying about this, election that we've had and now our new president. He's saying, I can understand if you voted for Donald Trump because perhaps he was the lesser of two evils. However, don't say that he is this icon of, faith and virtue. Correct.
Yeah.
And so he's taken a lot of heat for that stance, which doesn't seem like a bad stance. So I'm kind of wondering what you guys think about that.
You really want you want this episode to be about politics?
I don't. I don't. I don't.
Well, I think we can say this much.
I'm more concerned about why our church is turning on itself like that.
Well, first
Not
of all,
my church- my church
Russell
isn't.
Moore is Southern Baptist, so he's got that constituency. It's not the whole church. That's right.
Okay.
He's accountable to Southern Baptist. But without getting into politics, I like Russell Moore a lot. He's a friend. We've had him on the podcast. I totally support him. I hope all the best for him. I really want him to continue to be a voice for thoughtful Christians in the political sphere. And anything we can do to help him, we will do. But he's in a tough spot.
Is he going to have to leave his position, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, some voices, this not to get off track, Phil, it's your show, but some voices are saying, hey,
Not anymore.
He's supposed to be a liaison for the Southern Baptists in Washington, D.C., and some people fear because he was so vocally opposed to Donald Trump that he's not going to have access to the Trump administration. Therefore, what's the point of staying there?
It wouldn't be like Trump to be vindictive
No, not at all.
to anyone that wasn't on his side.
But, the case could also be made. He wasn't a huge fan of President Obama or many of his policies, and yet Russell Moore was still in Washington and still had access to a lot of people and a positive voice and influence. So I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, there's some very. I mean, the Southern Baptist Convention is a very diverse. There's huge, huge suburban
Swings.
mega churches, and then a gazillion little tiny rural churches, and so they're all over the map. But it yet obviously pulls very conservative politically, and so some people feel. Well, kind of like the reaction I got when I wrote about
Has that died
Mr.
down?
Trump, that if you're not supporting him, you must have been supporting Hillary Clinton. And, and Russell Moore was very clear to say, no, I'm not supporting Hillary Clinton either. I can't support either of these people. And for some people, that's not an acceptable answer.
Right.
You can't abstain. You have to pick one, and so you have to pick according to,
Well, I admire him for standing firm in what he believes and taking trying to walk that middle ground.
Yeah.
Do you know if it's really difficult for him, like emotionally, or is he able to weather that storm?
I have not talked to him.
I bumped into him at an Applebee's, and he was over in the corner crying.
I hope
Softly.
not.
Yeah.
Russell Moore, we're pulling for you.
Over his, let's see, what do they have at Applebee's? They don't have Awesome Blossoms. What do they have at Applebee's?
No one knows.
I don't know because I don't go to Applebee's anymore.
There's no Applebee's around here.
So let's get to our guest. We are here with, actually not here. She's not here. She's in Minneapolis. We're here with Jo Saxton. Hi, Jo.
Hi.
Jo is a pastor, missional leader, speaker, and author. Together with her husband, Chris, she leads Mission Point Church in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She is the director of 3D Ministries. That's like going to church with glasses on, 3D glasses, I think. It's an organization. I just need to keep reading. It's an organization that equips church leaders to create missional, discipleship-centered communities. She's also the author of More Than Enchanting, High Heels and Holiness, and that sounds like it'd be up your alley.
It's totally up my alley. I'm going to have to read that one.
And Real God, Real Life. She was also, you may pick this up as she speaks, she wasn't born in Minnesota, a place known for a rather distinct accent. She was born and raised in London. So, Jo, thanks for being on the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, okay, let's get a little bit of your backstory first. You were born and raised in London, and now you're in Minneapolis. What's your story? How did that happen?
Well, I moved to the States nearly 12 years ago. 12 years ago, me and my husband and a group of friends, we were working with a church initially in Arizona. And then moved to California. I think we liked extremes. We liked extreme heat. And now we thought we'd try out extreme cold.
Sure.
So apparently that's delightful.
Did you come over with Mike Breen and that whole crew?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I was one of that whole crew.
Got it.
What? Tell us more about this whole
Yeah,
crew.
what is that whole
Let Jo tell you.
Was it like a prisoner exchange program? What was it?
Did
How
you
did it
decide
work?
that we need to be missionalized?
Yeah.
No, I think what it was, we were invited over by a pastor who was based in Arizona. And,
Walt Callistad. You know Walt Callistad. He spoke at Okoboji.
Yeah, Walt Callistad.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And basically, he visited our church on sabbatical. And I think our church at the time in England there were a lot of young adults there, a lot of young families there. And he was asking, how do we engage with a different generation and people who are unchurched? In Sheffield, the city I was in at the time, maybe 2% of people would be found in church on a Sunday. which I thought was quite cool, actually. That's our norm.
Yeah.
I think for maybe the States, people were freaking out a little bit. So part of what we were involved with was working with church, initially with the church in Arizona, but now in churches all around the country, on how they do discipleship and mission in a way that engages the community, engages the whole church, not just the people who are paid to love Jesus or paid to lead a church.
Wait, you can get paid?
Yeah, gosh, I hadn't heard about that.
Not much.
Pay me to
Not
love
much.
Jesus, please.
Not much, my friends, not much.
It's called it's called the Church of England.
Ooh.
Yeah, well, quite. And I basically looking at how we do discipleship and mission in the way that a lot of people who they went into ministry hoped they would do before they ended up in lots of meetings.
That pretty much sounds like my experience.
You know, I mean, I don't think anybody planned when they felt some kind of call or draw or whatever language they'd use to ministry. No one planned to be stuck in meetings and serving everybody around them exclusively. They had dreams and goals, and it was noble and it was passionate and it was engaged with their community. And then it happened. And so some of it was uncovering people's original dreams and call and things that they were always passionate about, really. We didn't teach anybody anything new. We just reconnected them with it.
Okay, so you and this little posse, did you all decide that England was doing just fine, had enough Christians, and it was this America was the problem, that we need to be missionaries to America? How did that happen?
I think probably different people from that group had different stories on why America. You know, it was never that anybody felt that England had it down by any stretch of the imagination. I think it was more very individually. Different people had a bit of a stirring about the US. I've always liked the US. I liked the breakfasts, and I liked the milkshakes, and I liked the food. Well, some of the food, and I don't know whether I would say I felt this big kind of like call. I just kind of like the idea.
Yeah.
And
okay, compare the food between Arizona and Minnesota, because I don't know what Arizona's known for, but Minnesota's the land of the hot dish.
Arizona's got Mexican food.
yeah, Arizona's got Mexican food.
Good
I didn't.
Mexican
Well, yeah, the whole South
big
has
time.
Mexican food.
Yeah, there was a lot of Mexican food. There was a lot of. I mean, in some ways, I just thought I'd sample everything because, you know, I was new. I was engaging with a new culture. You should try as many foods as possible.
Yeah.
So I did. I just tried as many foods as possible. I think the biggest shift was, for me, the bread. The bread in America is a lot sweeter than the bread in England. There's a lot of sugar in it.
Yeah.
That took a while to get used to.
You might notice there's a lot of sugar in everything that we eat.
Yeah. You know, in time and 40 pounds later, yes, I discovered that also.
Did you, while you were in Arizona, did you ever have cactus fries?
No, I didn't.
What
I
are
did
those?
not.
Cactus
'Cause
fries.
I had them in Simona.
Sedona.
Simona. Oh, I want to, whatever. It's chunks of little cactus cut up into strips and then deep fried, and they call them cactus fries.
You really
What do
can't
they
fry
taste like?
anything, huh?
Oh, you can fry anything.
What do they
Scotty.
taste like?
Kind of like weak zucchini.
And do
Like
you eat
zucchini
the
that-
outside of it or just the
Zucchini
inside?
that doesn't have a strong will. Yeah, do you eat the outside? No, it's the inside. I
They
think that you're
peel
eating.
it and then cut
Well,
it.
they take
and
the
then fry.
thorns
And there's no
off.
pokies in it. You don't eat any pokies.
Good.
That's where the fiber is.
That would be
That
better.
is
pokies?
the spines.
Oh, okay.
The prickles. Have you ever seen a cactus?
Oh, many
Okay,
a
yeah,
cactus.
they have spines.
Yeah, lots.
Right, those are-
I've suffered
those are
at their
pokies.
hands on many occasions.
Okay. So now you're in Minnesota.
Yeah.
You have a church called
Mm-hmm.
Mission Point Church in Minneapolis. Does it meet in a coffee shop?
It does right now, yes.
Okay.
It met in a movie theater for a while, and then in a kind of neighborhood community center for a while, and we just moved to a coffee shop a couple of weeks ago.
Is a food truck the next stop?
Is
That
it
would be awesome.
Is it getting
I think that
smaller?
would be amazing.
Because I'm thinking a movie theater is a bigger venue than a
Yeah.
coffee shop. So is this going in the
it
wrong
was a
direction?
Small screen. It was a small screen movie theater.
Okay. Okay.
No, so no, not smaller, but I think just more practical for what we were trying to do. And now, I mean, Chris and I were the initiators. We planted, but we planted with a team. We're not the real main leaders now, anyway.
Okay.
It's the people with us, and they wanted to be closer to people and more engaged with the local community. And the thing is, when you're in a movie theater, you can talk to people, but they're there to go to the movies. So you can't kind of hang and stuff and take their time, their family time like that. We just gave them snacks on the way in.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have a question. I read in your bio that you are a pastor. Is that
Yes.
correct? So how did that happen?
I'm not really sure, to be brutally honest with you. It wasn't on my game plan. I mean, in the UK, I was a youth pastor for a while, and then I was the college age pastor for a while in the church I was at in Sheffield. And it was just, again, I don't know that I would say it was something I was really passionate about. It was an opportunity that presented itself. Apparently, I was the right person for the job, and then did it. And then when I got here, I think the women leadership thing can be a bit less complicated in England than it is here.
Is that because of Margaret Thatcher?
Ironically, I think in some ways, yes. I think you've seen things. We're not at the point in the UK where just them being there is a breakthrough. Now you get to critique them too, because you've had enough women leadership and stuff. So
Well, they have another woman prime minister now.
Yeah, we've got Theresa May.
Theresa May.
Obviously, yeah. And there's been a queen for over 60 years. I think people are used to, I don't want to make it sound like it's completely there, because there's a long way to go still, but that people are used to seeing women figures in leadership.
Okay, so when did you decide, was it after you were in the U.S. that you decided, hey, this is something I want to write about? Because the book that we're talking about is More Than Enchanting, Breaking Through Barriers to Influence Your World, which is targeted primarily at women, exclusively at women, medium?
Primarily at women, and guys can look in if they want.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, it's just like transgender
You're
bathrooms.
welcome. You're welcome.
I didn't bring the politics in this time.
Just saying.
Okay. So when did you start writing about women's leadership issues?
It was just after I'd had my girls. I've got 2 daughters, and they would have been babies at the time. And I think it was just very focusing on what it would look like, the kind of world they'd grow up in.
Yeah.
And both in the UK, I was still doing things in the UK, speaking and stuff, but I was engaged here and involved in women's ministries. There aren't really women's ministries in the same way in the UK, because there aren't that many of us who are Christians. So you got to kind of hang.
Right.
But I think it was watching people who were really talented, really gifted, apologizing for who they were, self-editing so that they weren't threatening, feeling frustrated because they didn't get opportunities. And I felt quite comfortable. I felt quite comfortable about who I was. But finding myself in situations where it wasn't, obviously different people have a different theological views. It wasn't that was the thing that bothered me. You can disagree with someone and still be family. That I'm not worried about that. It was more in the context of watching some of the women who had all these talents and abilities and qualities that they were apologetic about. And I think it was partly me asking the question, what if God likes you that way, though?
Yeah.
What if he likes the way that you can run a meeting? What if he likes the way you've got those skills? What if all the abilities you have are not a concession of your personality or because you didn't have a daddy, but are actually because God made you that way? Because that would be exciting.
Right. And was that something that you noticed for the first time when you came to the U.S., or were you also noticing that in England, and do you think it's different?
I noticed it in both places, actually, different in different ways. And again, it would depend on the denominational context and background and stuff. I think I was struck around, not to foray into politics too much, but in 2008, when when Hillary and Barack Obama were kind of vying for the nomination, when people were saying, is America ready for a woman to be president? I thought, wow, I didn't even realize that was a question.
Yeah.
And culturally, I didn't mean it in an arrogant way. I was just trying to understand why that was a question, because in my own consciousness and in my growing up, not just as a Brit, but also as a European, as an African, that I'd seen models of women in leadership all around the world. And so for me, I was like, oh, what does it feel like to not have seen that before? What does it make you question about yourself? What does it make you wonder? And the other thing that got me thinking about it was the distinct lack of maternity leave, in all honesty.
Huh.
Yeah.
And that was something you experienced as well? I assume you had your daughters here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I had my daughters here in the US, and I was in a position where we could stop for a while, where I could stop working for a while, and doing the sort of work where I could ebb and flow. But I just thought, wow, that's just a really challenging dynamic, you know? And at the time I had my kids, they just extended the maternity leave in the UK, where you could have like 9 months off or something, and have a job waiting for you when you got back. And a lot of that 9 months was paid. So
Wow.
I know, right? I know. So, so I think
Well, I can see why you moved here. That makes perfect sense.
let's go with that calling word again.
Oh yes, the calling. The
Because
calling.
it wasn't comfort. And
God did not call you to ample maternity leave.
So have you faced
sadly.
pressure or pushback being a woman in ministry?
Yeah, over the years, for sure. I mean, I think that I remember when in the UK, I remember I was speaking at a church and I was part of a mission team and they knew that a Joe was speaking. And the pastor said, he looked at me and he goes, I thought when they said Joe, it would be a man.
Uh-huh. And
I mean, he just said it straight. I mean, I was like 20 and I just said, well, sorry, I'm the only Joe you've got. So here we go.
And you said, I thought when you invited me, you weren't sexist.
Yep. I mean, I think at that moment I just laughed. There's a lot you can cover with laughter if you ignore it and do it anyway. So,
Right. Okay.
in that context.
This guy.
Well, that raises a question for me.
Go for it.
As you
Sky.
talk to other women who have leadership gifts and capacity, you already mentioned that a lot of them seem very apologetic about it. How do you advise them to handle those kinds of scenarios where there is resistance or discomfort with their leadership? You seem to react to that one with laughter and with good humor. Yeah. But what are other women doing and what are you telling them to do?
I meet a lot of women at conferences in tears. A lot of women in conferences in tears. A lot of people who reach out and say, who ask that question, say, what am I supposed to do? And how do you do it? Or how were you able to lead? What makes you feel confident about your leadership? And so there are a number of things I encourage women to do. I encourage them to look at where they're at theologically and say, on one level, it doesn't matter what I think about women in leadership because I'm pretty resolved. But when someone's standing there telling you you're not woman enough, you're not being godly, and all these things, you need to know what you think theologically about it.
Right.
That's you heard someone talk about it sometime, won't be enough for that battle. And so there's that piece I say to people. I often encourage them to say, I mean, I like the church. I'm a big fan of the church when it's working well. I know it's done some really messed up things over the years, but it's done some wonderful things too. And so I say, look, you want to put yourself in an environment that believes in what you're doing. I don't do well in an environment where I'm always going at the pastor for not thinking like how I think. And if I can't be part of that community and that family, then I would leave. I would. I mean, I've not put myself in those positions because I want to be able to love my brother and my sister who thinks differently from me. And it's easier to do that when I feel I'm not being kind of held back and put down.
Right.
So that's one. So sometimes with a lot of women leaders, I grieve with them because I think sometimes their voices just need to be heard. I asked them about who they would be if they didn't have to apologize for it. Before anybody told them who they ought to be or should be, I asked them to give voice to that again, because sometimes people have so pushed it down, they don't know anymore who they are and what they're really about. And then I encourage them to think I get them to think theologically, and then I get them to think practically, and then I get them to think environmentally. When I think practically, I'm saying, okay, what does that mean for you in your context? Is this feasible in your church context? And then I say practically, what do you need to do to make life work? Because some people do pay lip service or genuine passion for women in leadership and still don't equip the women to lead.
Okay, so that raises the other question then. What are you telling men in leadership who want to create environments where women can also thrive as leaders and use their gifts in their church? What do they need to know? I sit them down and I say, are you ready? And do you really want to do this? And then I say to them, first of all, it's wonderful that you believe this, but when you're saying this, you've got to remember culturally all the things women are told anyway about how their bodies, about their age, about their qualities, about their beauty. So when you say something once to somebody like you, to another guy who says, do you want to lead? They may say yes straight away. I say to most male leaders, if you're going to ask a woman to lead in your context, ask her at least 10 times. Just as a base level, because your voice is not loud enough yet. You think you're shouting and it's a whisper in our world because there are so many oughts and shoulds and cultural expectations. With women leaders I meet, it's very rarely skill that's the issue, it's confidence. It's confidence to give voice to what they're thinking. Wasn't there a study that came out recently that one of the reasons men tend to get paid more in workplaces than women is because they ask more and women just don't assert themselves
Right.
as frequently?
Because assertive women are not really admired
right.
culturally.
Right.
and not really affirmed for being. They're generally, most women who want to assert themselves in that kind of way have been called a name at some point, or maybe often. And in church context, they're not called the name in the same way, but the same thing is implied.
Yeah.
If their cultural context isn't one where strong women are the norm, or expressing their strength in a particular way is probably a more accurate way of putting it, is a norm, then it can be difficult.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of that to talk through with male leaders too.
So in your book, More Than Enchanting, Breaking Through Barriers to Influence Your World, I believe you talk about that there are, in some other countries, the church is much more women-led than the church in the U.S. Can you give us examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading, what's his name, Pastor Yonggi Cho in Korea, and he has a huge church.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the amount of pastors he has and stuff. And he said people often come to him and say, how did your church grow? And he said, release your women. And then they ask him again. And he said, no, I actually meant what I said the last time.
No, really? How did your church grow?
Release your women.
Like, that's cute.
Is that like unleash the hounds?
This is T.D. Jakes' philosophy of woman thou art loosed.
Really?
That's T.D. Jakes' hit book that put him on the map. Woman thou art loosed.
And is that the whole
But
point
it had nothing
of it?
to do with leadership.
Oh,
it had everything to do with
That's John 8.
whatever demons you were wrestling with.
Whatever things were holding you back, kind of thing. And then church planting movements in countries like India, that have been led by women as well, and throughout history, you'll see women who've been doing things.
Okay, so that raises a question, which is something I've heard.
This is like a total table flip. I'm sitting here with no questions whatsoever, and Sky keeps going, I have a question. You sound like me. I'm wearing off on you. Go ahead.
Oh,
There you
we're
go.
just switching roles?
Yeah,
Is
I
that
guess
it?
so.
I think
Go
you
ahead.
So one of the things you hear frequently is that in mission contexts, it's okay for women to lead. But once the church is established someplace and you have all the structures and all that, well, then they need to kind of, take their traditional role and let men lead. And frankly, you see that in a lot of places, because where the church isn't established, basically you need anybody and anyone to step forward and lead. And so it's we'll give women a long leash
if
there.
There's no option.
If we don't have a strong enough man to lead, then all right, I guess we'll let women do it. And that seems really crazy.
I think it's a theological thing that we talked about in our last podcast that goes back to Paul.
Yeah.
And Paul's teaching there. So it isn't just one I think of. Yes, there is a cultural aspect there, but I do think there is a theological aspect where, Paul is talking about women. It's always been taken that women are not to teach men.
Well, but we're reading those texts through our cultural lenses.
Correct.
And so there's a lot of baggage that needs to be unpacked from Paul's culture, from our culture, and the assumptions, plus the history. And I know there are good people who disagree
And
on
the
these.
translation.
Right, and translate. There's good people who disagree on the role of women in the church, but I would hope we can all agree that we want everybody using their gifts to the fullest of their potential that God has given them for the edification of the church. And it is sad that there are a lot of people, and women are one particular group, who don't use their gifts to their full potential because we've created structures that won't allow them.
So over the last, 30, 40 years, the churches in America that have been growing tend to be conservative churches. And the ones that tend to be shrinking tend to be, more mainline. I mean, mainline Protestantism is shriveled up.
Although recently, even those traditional churches are now shrinking. I mean, the Southern Baptist Convention is shrinking.
I said over the last 30 years.
Right, but if you take the last 10, it's not. There's not that much.
Did I say the last
no
10
fighting.
years?
No.
Did I
Okay,
say
okay.
over the last 10
No
years?
fighting, you
Okay.
two.
I'm not
So
fighting.
I'm trying to make a point here, and you won't even let me get to my point.
It is your show. Go right ahead.
Oh, that's in name only. So my point being, the more conservative theological interpretations have actually spread more because it's conservative evangelicalism that has grown over the last 40, 50 years, whereas, the churches that would be more promoting egalitarian roles for women, at least 20, 30 years ago, were typically mainline, and they're the churches that have been shrinking.
Yes, but I think there's a difference between correlation and causation.
I'm not, what?
Enlighten us, guys.
Well, yes, you're right.
I didn't-
Mainline denominations do tend to have more women in leadership. And yes, mainline denominations are also shrinking.
I'm not connecting those two things.
I know.
I'm not connecting
But
those.
you're saying it's the more conservative churches that are growing, and more conservative churches tend not to have women in
Yeah,
leadership.
and that's why I think America would be distinctly more patriarchal in our churches than England or other countries, because it's our most conservative churches that are having the most influence.
Yeah,
I
but
would ask in that, when you say are we talking white majority churches? Are we talking across the spectrum ethnically?
Yeah, that's true.
I would ask when we're talking about the churches that are growing, either they're growing by people getting saved or people moving around.
Yeah.
Because I think there are stats on that as well. And I guess when I think about that, I would say I work with a lot of conservative churches, and there are women leaders there.
Seriously?
There aren't often preachers there, but there are women leaders there.
yeah, that's a good
and
point.
who are very influential.
Yeah.
In their context. So and it's not that I mean, you guys understand America way more than I do. I've been here 12 years. I'm
You'd be
effectively entering
surprised.
puberty in my relationship with the US.
Yeah, once you get over how much you enjoy our breakfast food, then you need to learn, the whole picture. It's more
The whole stuff,
yes, it's more than
everything
just
else.
it's more than just what is the breakfast food that you're enjoying the most?
I like the pancakes. I'm not going to lie. The pancakes.
Are there no pancakes in England?
They're They're more a crepe.
Oh,
They're
okay,
a crepe,
right.
which I do love.
Yeah.
I love those on. They're a different nuance.
Okay.
Different nuance.
But that's French.
Or Swedish pancakes. That's what my mom always made me as a kid. We're Swedish, and we had Swedish pancakes, and they're crepes.
Okay.
So you can French your pancakes as long as you want. I like my Swedish ones. Okay, back to women in leadership.
You're funny.
Why? Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
For Jo.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if you know this. Sometimes I have to point it out. I am male.
Yes, you are.
I am involved in church leadership.
You're a metrosexual.
I am somewhat metrosexual, but that's okay. My wife still loves me. Why should I care? Because this, it's not holding me back. It's not causing problems for me that it's easier for me to lead than for my wife or, my daughters. Why should I read your book? Why should I listen to your arguments? Why should I even put you on my podcast? What am I doing?
Wow. Justify your existence, Jo.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I would say? You don't have to care, but you have to care about everybody being deployed in the Great Commission. It's actually not about you or me.
Yeah.
It's not about what you as a leader get to do. It's not about what I as a leader get to do. It's the fact that we can celebrate how big our churches of every denomination are, and there are millions of people who do not know the love of God. There are millions of broken pieces in every culture. And at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, at one point in our conversation, we were saying people were okay with women going out and doing stuff on mission, which begs the question on how we feel about women leading people of other races, but we'll get to that another day.
Right.
But actually, I think part of the thing that we need to open our eyes to is there's desperate things here. We should be planting churches 5-minute walks from everybody in this country. We should be going to the wealthiest of the wealthy, the poorest of the poor, and it needs all hands on deck. So on one level, it's like, you don't have to care because it doesn't change your world, but it does change somebody else's. And it's the degree to which we're going to care about other people's needs. And actually, scripturally, what it says about the Great Commission, all we have to do is what we feel, do as much as you feel comfortable, but do something. Do something. Right. I mean, we can wax lyrical till the cows come home. We can talk about and argue about it, which is why I don't argue about it anymore. I just do it. Right. And I would just encourage everybody to just do it, because it's not about us. I think I just remember what it was like not to know God, and knowing him is so much more fun. And having his life change mine. I just want other people to have the chance to hear about that. They don't even have to say yes. They just have the chance to hear. Need more people doing that.
Right. I remember at our church, it's a Christian Missionary Alliance church, so it's conservative theologically, and it's fairly conservative in terms of roles for women. But we have missionaries. We'd send out female missionaries that are solo female missionaries that are going out, spending 10 years, preaching, teaching, doing everything, that a man would do in another country. And then, and this is probably 20 years ago, and then they would come back, and then there was actually a debate. Is it appropriate for that woman to preach?
Yeah.
at,
Awkward.
at her sending church, and there was a little controversy. And even in our church, every time a woman preaches, there's at least one email complaining, with a Bible verse on it. So it's tricky, and there is that double standard of, oh, we're sending you out into the world, so of course you're going to preach, of course you're going to teach, of course you're going to lead. But once you come back here, then you need to get back in single file order the way we set it up.
Yeah.
50
Can
years ago.
I say something that's a little weird?
Yeah, what's weird?
So I'm just wondering.
Is this going to offend anyone
I don't think
that
it'll.
we know personally that
I don't
I'm going
think
to bump
it'll-
into?
I don't think
At
it'll offend
Applebee's
anyone.
or church?
It's more just a pondering, and I'm
Okay.
not sure if this is a thing just for me or if it's true for women in general. Joe, you would know this, but I grew up in the South, and it's a very patriarchal society, as you know, and it has been uncomfortable for me over time to feel comfortable with a woman in leadership, whether it's in the pulpit or even, I wrestle with, how I would feel about a female president. Although I think it worked wonders when Margaret Thatcher was the leader in, England. But still, to me, there is something comforting about male leadership. And so is that just because of the way I grew up culturally? Is that unique to me? Or
Well, then the same thing is true when people talk about news anchors. The network news. Can a woman successfully be a major network evening news anchor? Or are we all longing for the quote-unquote, what they call voice of God of Walter Cronkite?
Or what about late night television hosts? They're all male.
Yeah, those can't be women either.
Right. Well, Samantha Bee is trying to do that.
Samantha
to a degree.
Bee, yeah.
Wow.
I think it's fascinating, and I don't think you'd be the only woman who would say that because it's what we're used to. I think we are used to the familiar. The question is whether we make a theology of the familiar, in terms of, are we comfortable with people who are, and I hate the phrase, ably bodied in a particular way? Are we comfortable with what we see visually? Are we comfortable with people of different ethnicities? And obviously there are different reasonings. There are different reasonings on why people land on different conclusions. But I think for some people, it evokes a sense of safety. It evokes a sense of security and authority when a man leads. And people are happy with it, happy with women doing things elsewhere, but maybe not in their world. And I think I just accept that. I don't expect everybody to think the same.
But, I'm thinking about this too. I think about biblically, yes, there is what Paul said about women's roles in the church. But then you look at Jesus and you look at the way that he sort of structured his ministry. It was all men. And he did involve women and respected women and lifted them up, but they had different roles than the disciples did.
Well, though.
I think there's a range of theological arguments on that. I think when you look at Joanna, Susanna, and Mary in Luke 8, and they, pretty much bankrolled the mission and stuff, and they traveled with Jesus, which is something that even church leaders aren't always that comfortable about women doing now.
Yeah.
I think you have Mary sitting at Jesus' feet and taking the posture of a disciple. Now, I think there's also things of, if you're not educated and you're not given access to the same opportunities, you're not going to rise to the same kind of roles.
It was very cultural. I see what you're saying with that.
But equally, I don't want to make it sound like every woman's got to lead either. I don't want to say, hey, everybody, it's our right, it's our way. What I'm encouraging people to do is take a long look at the life you've been given, the gifts you've been given, and make your contribution. I don't think there's any such thing as just a mom or just a grandma or just an assistant or just a helper. It's that we need to activate this again in whatever our contribution is.
Wow.
That's helpful.
It's good stuff.
Does that make sense? I hope I'm saying that clearly.
Yeah, and at Pentecost, there were women in the room. And those were all of Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, and
Close-
perhaps most
close
importantly, the
followers.
very first witnesses of the resurrection were women.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a lot embedded in that.
A lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. Then,
We're out of time.
no doubt our listeners are across the spectrum on this theologically. But, Joe, you've really contributed some wonderful thoughts and perspective on it, so I hope it gives everyone some stuff to chew on.
Let's sum it up with a song, shall we?
Go for it.
How could this possibly go wrong? Oh, boy. Oh, So thanks, Jo Saxton, for coming along and sharing your story from, my computer just died, across the pond, because you sure had to do a lot of swimming to help us learn how to be kinder to our women, because if you're a woman, why, sure, you can lead, and there's lots of people that you can help feed, and if you read Jo's book, you can do a good deed by helping your girls along, because they can join me in this song, because if you lead devotions over the ocean and come back and preach, it shouldn't make a commotion. Thank you. That's pretty good.
That was a good one.
Thank you very much.
Don't take thanks yet.
So thank you, Jo, for making the motion to write your book. And everybody in the audience, take a look. It's called More Than Enchanting, Breaking Through Barriers to Influence Your World. And it was written by a girl. Okay, thanks, Jo.
Thanks, Jo.
Thank you very much.
We will see you next time. If you want to support the podcast, go to patreon.com/Phil Vischer. And you can listen to the new podcast that Sky has done called The Movie Proposal. There's not a new one, but there's a bunch.
There will be.
How many are up there?
10.
10?
Yes, and we're going to be reviewing La La Land and Silence very soon.
Oh, those are almost identical.
They are.
They're
They're actually inverse yin and yang movies.
So if you watch those two movies at the same time, you will have seen nothing.
You'll have seen completeness.
They'll cancel each other out completely.
Something like that.
Or everything.
Right.
You'll see nothing or everything. All right. And we will see you next week. We got another guest coming up next week. We will see you there. Thanks, Jo. Go check out her book. Go to Amazon, go to wherever, or go to her coffee shop in Minneapolis and track her down. See you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Phil Vischer Podcast is produced by Phil Vischer Enterprises and recorded live at Jellyfish Lab Studios. This episode was edited by Jason Rugg and was fact-checked by absolutely no one. For more information, go to philvischer.com.